You have a version of this slideshow on your Georgia View site, but this is a video where I walk you through it and try to point you in the right direction for your DBQ. The question is, which post-war fears were resolved before Eisenhower's presidency and which continued, got worse, or got better? The only ones you need to look at or concern yourself with are the ones that are still around during Eisenhower's presidency, and you need to evaluate his actions on them. Brinkley is obviously a good book to use to help you do that, but you have to identify the Cold War fears and ignore the non-Cold War fears. See which ones were still existing when Eisenhower became president, and ask yourself whether the documents show Eisenhower dealing successfully or unsuccessfully with them. That's what you'll be talking about in your essay. Fears for the endurance of post-war prosperity. We already looked at that. Yes, that was Cold War related, and yes, it still existed in 1953. Fears of internal subversion. Was that Cold War related? Well, obviously it was. And of course it existed after 1953 because we know that McCarthyism continued after 1953. Fears for the fragility of American unity. A concern with unity or consensus. Was this Cold War related? Well, yes, because if the country was not united, then it could not be secure against the Russians. And this definitely existed after 1953. Fears for the strength of America's military ace, American technological superiority. Was this Cold War related? Well, obviously, yes. If we weren't militarily strong, then we couldn't stand up to the Russians. Did this still exist after 1953? I'll let you answer that question. Post-war fears caused by the president, as I said before, if we look at Truman, which is not relevant to your essay, you see that he inspired some of his own problems. But when we look at Eisenhower, you have to evaluate how well Eisenhower handled McCarthy, how well he handled the fears in his press conference, which is detailed in Document A, how well he handled the Korean War, and how well he maintained national unity. Now, the next slides may help you with this. Now, consensus is what we're talking about when we talk about unity. And I think the areas you need to focus on are federal aid to the economy, civil rights, and McCarthy, and internal subversion. Did Eisenhower's way of handling these things promote consensus? I guess to the extent it did, it strengthened American unity and eased Cold War fears. Now, consensus is not necessarily always a good thing, but it certainly would have reduced the fear level in the 50s, and that was what the question was all about. So how well did he do on these three things? Use Brinkley to help you answer the question. And this slideshow. Eisenhower was the first Republican since Hoover to be president. So the question was, would the New Deal survive? And the answer was not known until you had a Republican who ratified the New Deal, and that's what Eisenhower did. So I think he brought the country together by establishing agreement on the part of Republicans and Democrats alike that the New Deal was here to stay. He expanded Social Security benefits. He retained the TVA. Most of the New Deal that he inherited, he either maintained or expanded. For example, stock market regulation, bank deposit insurance, Social Security, protection of labor, public works, all either stayed the same or expanded. Social Security definitely expanded. Benefits expanded. Was this promotive of consensus? Absolutely. So that probably eased the fear level. On the question of civil rights, Eisenhower appointed Earl Warren to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court But he regretted that decision. That's what I mean when I say he dissed him. Warren brought unity to the court and resulted in the Brown decision, which declared segregation of schools and other public places unconstitutional. Unanimous decision. But Eisenhower regretted that decision because he did not like any ruling on civil rights, which he thought was a divisive issue. Actually, what was divisive was the continuation of segregation, and that was sure to tear the country apart at some point. So I think Eisenhower had it wrong here. He wanted to run away from civil rights. He refused to support the court. He refused to promote its decision. There was the scandal of the U.S. Public Health Service syphilis study, which was discovered in the 1950s. Actually, I'm sorry, let me back that off. It wasn't discovered. It was still going on during the 50s, even though it began in the 30s. And it was a study whereby the U.S. Public Health Service did not treat black victims of syphilis, but studied their lives as their health deteriorated, even while it was saying that it was treating these victims. So the U.S. Public Health Service study was discovered in 1972 and became a scandal, justifiably so. But Eisenhower actually awarded her a medal in the 50s before all this knowledge of what was happening broke. But he should have known, and maybe he did. The Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 was not supported by Eisenhower. It was a grassroots movement. But Eisenhower did get high marks for sending the 101st Airborne Division to Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957 to enforce the admission of black school children into Central High School. He would not tolerate violations of federal law, which is what was happening when these black school children were denied admission into Central High School. So you see, Eisenhower tried to take a middle stance and walk down the middle of the road on civil rights, trying to enforce consensus. But the only real way to establish consensus would have been to tackle the civil rights issue head on. Obviously, his actions were in some ways Cold War related, but was his record as a whole promotive of consensus? I'll let you decide that. Eisenhower and the reduction of U.S.-Soviet tensions involved massive retaliation. Find out what that is and talk about it in your essay. Ending the Korean War, his CIA escapades in Iran, Guatemala, and Cuba, and his Vietnam policy. Now, if you can find out information about these things and incorporate it in your essay, you'll get a better grade to the extent that what you say is accurate. On McCarthy and subversion, we already talked about this, so there's no reason to linger on this slide. But you really ought to talk about Eisenhower's handling of McCarthy. An essay that does not do that is going to be an essay with problems. How well did Eisenhower reduce U.S.-Soviet tensions? You need to talk about Eisenhower and the Suez Crisis. You don't have to. You don't have to. But if you do, and do so accurately and relevantly to the question, you'll get a better grade. Berlin Crisis, how well did he resolve that? The one in 58 to 61. Brinkley talks about it. The U-2 spy flight. Vietnam again. And in his farewell address, Eisenhower warned against the influence of the military-industrial complex, giving too much money and power to the military and to the arms makers. This was an interesting speech from a five-star general, warning against the military-industrial complex. I think it was a great speech because it helped focus American attention on the fact that too much power on the part of the military is not a good thing for the country. Once again, Eisenhower was trying to walk a middle road, trying to take the middle ground. And I think on this issue, at least, it was very helpful.